I don't take a strong stance on what Chessie might be. It could really be most anything. If I had to guess, I think a prehistoric whale with a slendered body, I think fits the profile, and I think that also fits the profile of a lot of sea serpents all over the world.
I will tell you that I want Chessy to be real more than anything in the world. And it was certainly real to me as a kid.
Chessie is a monster of sorts in the Chesapeake Bay. Most descriptions of the animal are 20 to 40 feet in length. It's usually dark in color and very snake-like in appearance. Sightings go back as far as 1846. I'm Denver Michaels. I'm an author. I've written several books on lake monsters, cryptozoology, and other strange phenomena. Witnesses described Chessie as moving in a snake-like manner, sometimes appearing like a sine curve almost in the water. The oldest documented sighting that I'm aware of Chessie comes from Captain Lawson, who spotted the creature off of Cape Charles off the Delmarva Peninsula. He described it as a large creature with bony protrusions along its back. In the 1930s, two fishermen outside of Baltimore saw a creature at least 12 feet in length with a horse-like head the size of a football. In 1963, helicopter pilot Walter Myers wrote a letter to his state senator assuring him that Chessie exists after he spotted Chessie from the air in a tidal estuary in Hartford County, Maryland.
Like Mulder, I want to believe. I think we all do. My name's Dr. Eric Cheezum. I'm an expert on Chessie, and I'm here to talk about the history of Chessie. The Associated Press kind of dubbed it Chessie because one of their reporters had to retype the name of this, or the descriptions, and rather than type out the long description, it was easier just to put Chessie. Mid to late July of '78, along the Potomac River, a retired CIA officer who had just moved to a place along the Potomac was sitting out one night on his back porch and saw this thing go down the river. And that sort of touched off a whole series of sightings that really caught fire in what is called the northern neck of Virginia, which is the area bordered by the Potomac River there.
The 1970s and 80s were the heyday for Chessie, and Chessie became a household name for residents around the bay after newspapers, locally and nationwide, picked up stories of sightings of the creature. By June of 1978, over 30 people had spotted Chessie in and around the bay. In 1980, a farmer in Westmoreland County, Virginia, spotted a 14-foot snake-like creature in the Potomac. 15 miles downstream, others reported a 25-foot creature.
In 1980, the first major sighting that kind of moved the monster from Virginia waters over to Maryland was when a woman named Trudy Guthrie was sailing out in the bay and saw what she kind of described to be something that we would probably now say is a manatee, if you read the description. And that kind of kept the story alive and brought it into Maryland. And once the monster or the sensation had kind of moved over, it really didn't show up in Virginia much after that.
The most famous Chessie sighting would be the Robert Frew video from 1982. He and his wife and some friends spotted a creature. Frew videoed the creature and obtained about 3 minutes of footage.
So on Memorial Day weekend of 1982, Bob and Karen Frew were kind of having a Memorial Day picnic in their house with some neighbors, and somebody looked up and said, "There's this thing going down the bay." Bob and Karen Frew lived on the northern part of Kent Island at a place called Love Point. Somebody said, "We need to go get the video camera." So they ran upstairs to their an upstairs bedroom that faced out on the bay as well, and pulled out a video camera and took what is now a very famous video of Chessy the sea monster, which they assumed that's what it was. I think even in the video someone says, "Look, it's Chessy the sea monster," or Chessy the sea serpent. They became, I think you could say, the standard bearers for the legitimacy of the monster. And at the same time, they met up with an organization called the Enigma Project, which was based out of Randallstown, Maryland. And at the time, that was run by a man named Michael Frizzell, and they were sort of partners in it, Bob Lazara.
The Frew tape shows a serpentine creature about 25 feet long. The video aired on a local television station, and later individuals from the Enigma Project, who study strange phenomena, viewed the tape and concluded that it was a living creature shown in the tape and not something inanimate.
The Enigma Project got involved with the video and kind of helped almost as agents for the Frews to help get the video to experts who could study it. And Frizzell and Lazara, particularly Frizzell, had the connections within the kind of local scientific community. The Enigma Project itself was made up of, I guess you would say, scientists, engineers and people who were inclined scientifically. So they were already sort of connected and could reach out, reach out and touch someone, as the old expression went.
Scientists from the Smithsonian studied the Frew tape, and although they were intrigued, they were unable to come up with a consensus on what was shown in the video because of the grainy footage.
And at that conference, the head vertebrate biologist of the Smithsonian, who was a man named Dr. George Zug, he pulled together a panel of scientists, biologists, really quite a distinguished panel of scientists. And they all sat down in August of 1982 and watched this video. And at the end of it, the best they could come up with was that it was probably something alive. So I think it was kind of a disappointment for everybody. Really kind of for the next 3 or 4 years, you have kind of a rash of Chessy sightings, mainly around Kent Island. Kent Island becomes ground zero for Chessy there in that mid-'80s period. In fact, the Kent Island Bay Times called itself Chessy Central. And then really in 1986, you have the last few sightings. There have been mentions of others, but I'm not sure I would regard them as... They're certainly not classic sightings. And really since the late 80s, Chessy hasn't had much currency, I guess you could say.
Someone sent me an email recently about a sighting that he had while fishing off of Kent Island in the late 1990s. He saw something snake-like in appearance, dark in color, about 30 feet long, surface for about 30 seconds, and then dip back into the water. Theories for what Chessy could be ranges from everything from a manatee to an oarfish, escaped anacondas from fruit ships that were harbored in Baltimore, all the way to prehistoric creatures such as a plesiosaur. And no one really knows.
But you really have to kind of contort yourself to get to the anaconda theory. And it didn't matter how many scientists or fisheries experts said anacondas won't survive in this kind of environment. No one believed it. Then in the 90s, a bull manatee decided to swim up the East Coast. Of course, dubbed the manatee Chessy. And so this mythological thing now becomes the manatee. And the manatee Chessy then went on for another really decade or so The Fish and Wildlife Service tracked it. It swam up and down the East Coast to great fame in the mid-90s. Chessie's role in the environment. Really, from the moment that people start seeing this monster, they think about its relationship with the environment. In mid to late 1986, the Annapolis office developed this wonderful children's coloring book that used Chessy to kind of, I guess you could say, as a spokesman to tell kids about the problems in the bay and the illness that was affecting the bay and the fellow animals that were suffering and those sorts of things. But what it did then was to really propel Chessy into a different avenue or a different place, because the coloring book and the use of Chessy as an environmental icon sort of separated it from what you might say was a kind of a dying mythological story. You know, by 1986, the sightings are dropping off, and so there's, you know, Chessy's sort of ready for a new phase of life, and it comes along in the form of the coloring book and being a mascot and those sorts of things. The reason why Chessy appears where Chessy appears and when Chessy appears is because of the post-World War II consumer world that erupted in the late 40s and really radically transformed everywhere in America, but especially in the kind of mid-Atlantic, in places where you have a rather bucolic lifestyle within reach of urban areas. People who live on the waterfront on the Eastern Shore and the Northern Neck before the war, and even after the war, up to the war, are living in a world where water is about work. It's a place, a space for fishing, to feed your family, to sell. It is not necessarily a recreational place. When suburbanites show up, they impose a very different mentality on those places. Chessy is a function of people who don't know the water and to some extent denigrate its work value. And they go to the water and they say, I see a wave out there, only it's not a wave. It's an unknown object, and therefore it must be a sea monster. So there's a whole concept there of the post-war consumer cultural world actually reshaping reality. If the Loch Ness Monster is the Rolls-Royce of sea monsters, and maybe the Lake Champlain Monster is the Ferrari, Chessy is a Pinto.
I would like to believe that in the future we might find out the identity of Chessy, but if we haven't yet, who knows?
And I would rather believe that there's a sea serpent living in the bay, because I think that would be wonderful.